Hello, Julie here and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to share with you how I made 3 shaker cards. Now I've used 3 different types of shaker mechanisms for these. One is your standard shaker where I've used a shape cut into the front of the card. The other is a full page shaker and the other one uses some tulle in place of the acetate for the shaker front. The first card I made is a standard shaker card. So I've cut my card base 10.5 by 5 1/4, folded it in halves to make a 5 1/4 inch square card, and I've also cut a piece of white card 5 inches square, and I've used my Kaisercraft Scribble Star die to cut 2 apertures in that front panel, and I've also used it to cut 2 stars from the basic grey. It's very old. It's called Sweet Threads. I also cut a piece of acetate that's 5 inches square. So I used the red tape, double-sided tape, and I think that's about 1/4 inch wide. Ran that around the whole outside edge of that 5 inch panel of white cardstock that I'd cut the stars out of, and then attached my clear acetate onto the back of that panel. I'm going to add the pink stars that I cut out of the pattern paper to the clear acetate behind the panel of the stars that go on the front of the card. I'm going to do this so that my stars have some definition to them. They don't just look like a blank shape. It makes it a bit more interesting and a bit prettier. So to do that, I'm just going to add some of my art glitter glue to an acrylic block and use a old sponge to dab that glue onto the back of those stars and then stick that onto the acetate on the front panel of the card. To create the well that's going to hold my shaker elements, I'm going to use double-sided foam tape. I've got some of the high-tack double-sided foam tape that I find works well on acetate. So I'm going to, because it's quite wide, I'm just going to cut it in halves lengthways and then form 2 boxes around, well, 1 box around each of the 2 stars. When you're doing this, the important thing to remember is to make sure that your box is completely sealed up. So in other words, your corners have to be basically watertight, otherwise whatever you put in there, and in my case I'm going to put tiny glass beads so they will come out easily. So the important thing is to make sure that your tape or whatever you're using to make your container is completely sealed so that nothing can escape. Now I'm going to remove the backing of my tape in preparation for adding this panel to the front of my card. So to fill my shaker elements, I'm going to use these tiny glass beads. I think I got them at Cheapest Chips, I'm not sure, I can't remember. There's several different ways you can do this. I'm going to add my shaker elements to the little wells that I've made in the panel. So I'm adding them to the back panel. This is not probably the best way to do it because when you're going to then add that to the front of your card, you can't see whether it's centered or not. So yeah, it's probably better if you can add the elements or the shaker elements to the card front and then lay your panel on top of it. But anyway, I did it this way. I didn't get it perfectly in place, but I got it close enough. The sentiment for this card comes of stamped and heat embossed using Woodware's stamp called Word Fragments. I've done a whole heap of those and just put them in a jar on my desk so that when I want a sentiment, I don't have to go through the process of stamping and embossing and so on and so on. And so now I'm just trimming my sentiment down to size. I'm trimming it fairly close to the black border that's around it. As I said, it is black heat embossed, so it has got a gloss to it. And once I've trimmed that down to size, I'm going to mat that onto a piece of the same pattern paper, the pinky paper, and trim that down, ink around the edge of it, and then attach it to the front of my card with a piece of scrap cardboard behind it. I've cut a third star from the same pattern paper, and I'm going to add that to the front of the card as well. This particular star won't be a shaker, but it just adds a bit to the front of the card, a bit more embellishment. So I'm going to position that and attach my sentiment. For a little bit of decoration for the inside of the card, I cut another one of those stars and from the same pattern paper and attached it to the inside. The next shaker I'm going to make is the full page shaker. So this is more of a flat shaker. I've cut a card base the same size as the previous one. I've cut a piece of gold glitter card that is 5 inches square, and I've cut a piece of white cardstock that is 4 3/4 inches square. I've also cut a piece of acetate that is I think it's 5 3/4 inches square, and then I've scored along that at 3/8 of an inch on each edge. This is going to be the shaker part that goes over that white panel that I cut, that 4 3/4 inch panel. So with the scoring line, what that does is that leaves that 4 3/4 inch panel in the middle. I did do this twice actually. The first time I did it, I used a thicker acetate and it didn't fold very nicely around my panel, so I redid it with a thinner piece of acetate, but I did it exactly the same way. Once I'd scored my acetate, I used a pair of scissors just to cut those corners away, and I cut them at a slight angle so that when they folded back over the front panel they sat nicely. So I did that on all 4 corners. Once I'd trimmed the corners away, I used my bone folder and folded those score lines back. So I folded them into towards the centre of the panel, the acetate panel, and then I used double-sided tape on the inside of the folded back section. So I would suggest that you use double-sided tape because glue does not really work all that well on acetate. So I'm using double-sided tape, but if you wanted to try the glue, I find that it just takes too long to dry and doesn't really stay stuck for very long at all. Once you've done that, take your piece of cardstock that you're going to use for the back of your panel and put it inside of that acetate piece. Peel off the tape on 3 sides and fold that down and burnish it well so that it stays in place. So remember, only do this for 3 sides. Now we're going to use that one open side to add our shaker elements. So in my case, I'm using some fine gold glitter. So just tip the whatever it is that you're going to use, in my case glitter, into your little pocket and then seal the top end or the last end in the same way that you did the other 3 sides. As you can see, when I put my glitter in, I got a stray object in there, so I undid one edge, took that out and sealed it back up again. I was thinking about leaving it in there, but I just couldn't. So yes, I fixed that up. Now I'm going to use my art glitter glue to attach that panel to the gold glitter panel that I cut that's 5 inches square. I'm going to use the liquid glue because the double-sided tape doesn't really stick all that well to the glitter paper. Now I'm going to ink around the edge of my gold glitter panel and then use double-sided tape to attach that to my card front. A little tip, if you are going to use this type of shaker for your card, the best idea is to use something fine for your fill. You don't want something too bulky, otherwise it catches. There's not a lot of space between the acetate and the backing sheet. To embellish this card, I used my Kaisercraft DD489 Rose Cluster die, and I used that same gold glitter cardstock that I used to back my shaker panel and cut that flower out. The gold glitter cardstock did not cut all that well, I have to admit. I had to run it through quite a few times to get it to cut through. I used my art glitter glue and sponge once again to add glue to the back of that die cut and then attach that to the front of the shaker panel. The sentiment came from my sentiment box, but it was stamped with this stamp, and I think I got this on the front of a magazine. So I have stamped and heat embossed the sentiment with gold embossing powder, and I'm now going to cut it out. I'm going to cut the happy out into just a square, or rectangle, sorry, and the birthday I'm actually going to cut around the font. Then I'm going to ink around the edge of those and mat them onto some of the same gold glitter cardstock, and the birthday I will then fussy cut around that gold section as well. So once I've done all that, I will attach them to the front of my card using art glitter glue. The third card, instead of using acetate on this card, I'm going to use some tulle for the front of my shaker panel. So I'm using this pattern paper that I've had for years, and it is, what brand is that? It's Christmas Celebration by Alison Ellis Designs. Now, is there a year on this? No. Oh, 2007. So there you go. So I'm using the same size card base, 5 1/4 inches square. I've cut a piece of that pattern paper 5 inches square, and I'm going to attach that to the front of my card base using double-sided tape. I'm going to create a frame for my shaker element, and I'm going to use my Lifestyles Nesting Doily Squares and also my Spellbinders S6-025 squares. So the outside I will cut with the doily squares, and then I'll use the plain square in the centre of that to cut the centre of the frame out. I will tape those two dies in position and then run them through my Big Shot and cut the frame out of some white cardstock. Now that I have my frame, I'm going to attach my tulle to it. So I'm going to run a bead of glue around the edge of the frame and then lay my tulle on top. When you're using tulle for your front of your shaker panel, you need to choose a shaker element that is not too fine, because really fine stuff will get through the tulle. But I'm going to use bigger pieces in mine, so the tulle will be fine. So I put the tulle on top of the glitter, put something with a bit of weight on top, and just let that set for a few minutes. Then I'm going to take my scissors and trim it down so that there's no overhang or no tulle hanging out behind the frame. Now I'm going to use my scrapbook.com foam adhesive strips. These are an 1/8 of an inch wide, and I'm going to run a double layer around the inside edge of the frame, so between the scallop and the opening. Once again, I'm making sure that my edges butt up to each other so nothing can escape. Even though I'm using a larger shaker element this time, I still want to make sure that there is a complete seal. Otherwise, you know what it's like, everything always finds a way to get out. I'm actually going to use 2 layers of foam here. This foam that I'm using, I'm not sure how thick it is. not sure, but anyway, I decided to use 2 layers because I didn't want the shaker elements catching on the tulle. Now this time I'm going to add my shaker elements the easy way. I know about where on my card front I'm going to put my shaker frame, so I can sprinkle my shaker elements, which are like white iridescent heart shapes, into the centre of my card because that's where my shaker is going to be, and then I can place my frame over the top of it, and that way I know I can see if I'm in the right place and I'm centred in the centre of my card. To embellish this card, I'm going to use my honeybee dies called Lovely Layers Heart Line. I've cut once in green and once in white, and I've used the solid die. It comes with a frame and a solid. So I've used the solid die, and I'm going to just attach those 2 die cuts to the front of the card so that they overlap my shaker frame. I'm not going to layer them directly on top of each other. I want them skewed so that it looks nice and full, and I'm also not going to attach every leaf down. I'm going to just attach it where I need to make sure it's going to stay in place so that I get lots of dimension with these leaves. The sentiment for this card also comes from that Woodware Word Fragments stamp, and I have stamped and heat embossed it with gold embossing powder. Now I'm going to trim it down, add some foam tape to the back of it, and then attach it to the front of the card over the top of those leaves. To finish this card off, I cut another one of the leaf sprays in the green paper and attach that to the inside of the card. So that's my 3 cards for today. A link will be in the description box to some other videos that I've created using or making shaker cards, and also links to the products that I've used will be in the description box below. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and if you have and you're not already a subscriber, I'd love it if you would subscribe to my channel. If you are a subscriber already, a thumbs up or a comment. I read all the comments and answer all the comments would be great. So thank you for being here with me today, and I hope you can join me when I post my next video. Bye for now.